May I speak in the name of the Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen. There is a company that advertises on television called Confused.com. It plays on the fact that there's so many different insurances and companies and products that are offered to people that it can become very confusing. Their advert is really trying to streamline what is offered, and they're telling us we'll make this less confusing and easier to understand. I'm not sure that's the case, but that's the way they advertise it anyway. Confused.com. I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to feel like Confused.com as well. When the pandemic first started and we had lockdown, it was the sort of straightforward to understand the rules and regulations around the way we needed to live our lives. Basically, most of us needed to stay at home in order to be safe and for others to be safe as well. Apart from key workers, we were only being allowed to go out to get essential food, medicine, or our daily exercise. But for many people who received the letter from the government, it clearly stated to them that they needed not to go outside their own homes. And many people still haven't ventured over their door threshold yet because they're still living in isolation from everyone else. It can be confusing when we watch the newspaper or the TV that shows people going out with, it seems to me, abandonment, mixing with each other and acting like nothing's really wrong. And yet we all know that COVID is still out there. Slowly, the government is beginning to release the restrictions on each one of us, and it seems to change from week to week as they slowly lift the lockdown. And this can be a bit confusing. I can't always make sense of it. It's been a real relief to be able to go and visit people in their gardens and to have proper pastoral visits. But given our weather, I have to wait and see on the day if the weather will permit, either wet or too hot, whether I can actually go and visit someone. But I have managed to visit people in their gardens. We're told that we can have small gatherings in our gardens. We've now got little bubbles that we can have, and we're moving towards when we can meet with one other household. Although we can go to pubs and restaurants and cafes soon, we can't gather in our church buildings in any large number. There is still a great deal of restrictions, even though the church is due to open as a building. I need to assure you that we're not going to do that until we're feeling safe to do so. But in the meantime, church buildings are open for private prayer. So it can be a bit confusing. What can you do? What can't you do? You have to just keep checking. Check the websites, check the news. I can check the Church of England website. I'm constantly checking to see what can I do, what can't I do. In the reading today, we find Jesus confronted with people who live their lives by rules and regulations. By and large, these are the Pharisees and the scribes, people whose lives are governed by the rules and regulations of the Torah and their faith. The rules and regulations govern who they can meet, who they can see, who they can be with, what food they can eat, what food they need to avoid, what people they need to avoid, what is clean, what is unclean. It was designed so that people could live righteous lives close to God, with God interwoven into every part of your life. So every part of your life was a conscious reflection of your faith in your understanding of God being present in that everyday life. On the surface, it seems a strong way to live. But the rules and regulations are also restrictive, because they also excluded people who weren't born to the faith, people who in their eyes were maybe unclean because of illness or because of their occupation, such as a tax collector, a prostitute, or who weren't of their faith, who are of a different faith or a different tradition or a different nation. such as the Romans who occupied their own countries, or Samaritans. So their regulations were very tight, very restrictive, but they defined who they were. But Jesus was challenging this. He was saying, yes, this is a good thing that God is interwoven in our life, but the restrictions have become a barrier for others to encounter God, a barrier for those on the margins who felt no hope, no release from being excluded. Jesus wanted to welcome into the fold of God's family all who would respond. So for him, he simplified the rules and regulations. He simplified the confusion by giving a clear message. He said, if you want to follow God, all you need to do is love God with all your mind, all your heart, with all your soul, and in your life, and love your neighbour as yourself. These would be the foundations on which you need to build your life. But it's not necessarily an easy way to live. It can also be very challenging. It means that you have to look at the way you're living and responding to the world. And that faith can be an encouragement, but it's also a responsibility. He talks about the yoke, his yoke, being easy. When he says easy, the translation is not quite accurate. The yoke is meant to be fitted well to your shoulders to make it easier for you to carry the load. There is a legend that Jesus, when he was a carpenter before he started his ministry and mission, designed yokes. And these were a piece of wood that would go across the necks of animals that had to pull large weights, such as plough. And he would measure the animals and work out what size the yoke needed to be so it would fit easily across their shoulders and enable them to pull great weights comfortably without hurting themselves. So when he's talking about a yoke, he's talking about something that's familiar to people. They would have seen these yokes on animals, but also individuals may use a yoke across their shoulders to carry heavy weights, one balanced on either side of the wood, enabling you to do things that normally you wouldn't be able to do, or carry weights that you're not already be able to do. So what Jesus is saying about faith is that it carries a responsibility across your shoulders. It can be challenging, it can be changing, it might direct your life. But the easy bit is to do with God fitting it to what you can do. He doesn't want to make your life hard. He doesn't want to make your life difficult. Faith is meant to help you carry your burdens. Faith is meant to help you face the challenges ahead. So one of the confusing things, what can I do? How can I move forward? How can I be a good Christian? What must I do to be a good Christian? Love God. That means learning about God through the Bible, through the Old Testament, and through the teachings of Jesus, his son, and the disciples that followed after him. Love God, build a relationship with God, speak to him through prayer, make it part of your everyday life. Talk to him. You can use formal prayers, but you can use random prayers as well. When you're doing your gardening, maybe you should give praise for all the wonderful flowers around you. When you're washing up, give thanks that you've got a hot supply of water. When you meet someone in the street on the other side of the road, say to God, it's wonderful about all the children of God that are around me, that care for me. Build your relationship with God. Do this through communication. Speak to God, but listen to God and see his presence in the world through the Holy Spirit. Love God. Love your neighbour as yourself. How can we do this? Well, Jesus taught us how. Through example, through his lives, through his teaching, and through his miracles, his death and his resurrection, and through his Holy Spirit. He leaves us guidance on how to live. He tells us, do what I do, follow me, and you will know the way. So to love your neighbour as yourself, to be a good Christian, is to follow Christ, to follow his example. When my children were teenagers, one of the things that had come out, which was sweeping across the youth in the church at the time, were little bracelets and badges and bookmarks and necklaces with an abbreviation, what would Jesus do? And they were using it to inspire them in their faith. They were trying to think about everyday life and everyday action. And rather getting confused with lots of different things, they boiled it down to one thing. What would Jesus do? I think that's a good example for us. So we're moving into a more uncertain time as restrictions begin to lift. The rules and regulations about how we govern our life are changing. They can be confusing. We can meet some people, we can't meet others. We can do some things, we can't do others. These are all designed to make us safe, and we need to follow them. Our faith is clear as well. Our faith tells us that we need to love God and love our neighbour as ourselves. But it also tells us that God will not give us things that we can't manage. He will only give us as much as we need and can manage. Any challenges or changes ahead, and there will be many, because the world in which we live will not be the same. Our society in which we live will not be the same after this pandemic. Our churches and our lives and our faith will not be the same after this pandemic. But God is the same. He will be our constant, our rock on which to build our lives. And Jesus says, you don't have to do this alone. I will enable you to do this. I will share your burden, your responsibilities. My yoke is easy. Amen.